the screen here. Can I get a thumbs up from somebody that it's the correct view? Perfect, cool. So good morning, everyone. I really want to say thank you for joining us for today's breakout session. I was looking through what else is offered at this time slot, and all of them were really great presentations. So I appreciate you taking the time to spend with us the next hour talking about virtual services now and moving forward. The three of us presenting today represent the professional staff in the Office of Student Life at Nevada State. My name is Phil Lamotte. I use he, him, and his pronouns, and I'm privileged to serve as director.
Hi everyone, my name is Carlos Navarro. I'm a student life coordinator at Nevada State College. I know that probably title can mean so much things, so I'll kind of summarize it really quickly. I oversee campus recreation at our campus, as well as clubs and organizations and leadership there. I go by his, him, and he, his, and him.
Hi everyone, my name is Yesica Placencia-Flores. I am the NSA Business Manager and Advisor here at Nevada State College. What that means too, I work directly and advise our student leaders on campus, but also work through the Office of Student Life to do programs and engagement. And I'm happy to be here.
Awesome, thank you both. So today we're going to start off by providing some context and background on really the arc of our office's services over the past 15 months or so. And talk about the profile of our system, the Nevada system of higher education, and of Nevada State College specifically, to really show why virtual services matter now, and perhaps more importantly, why they'll continue to matter. From there, Yesica and Carlos are going to share their experience, what they learned, challenges, and plans for moving forward. I do want to take a moment right here before we get started to emphasize two things. First, Carlos and Yesica stepped up in such a big way for our students and worked really hard to completely pivot, work tirelessly to continue helping our students build community in a time where we weren't able to do what we would typically do to build community. On top of just generally really working hard, they treated me with compassion as I took time off for the birth of our second son at not necessarily an ideal time, but the only time where I was having my second son. So I want to say, in a shameless way, use this platform to publicly say thank you to Carlos and Yesica for just how great they've been and continue to be. The second point of emphasis is the way that the three of us perceive this conference. So we do plan to information share, but we also view this as an opportunity to network across departments if you're from Nevada State College, and across campuses if you're from a different campus community. And I know that we have more than just student folks registered for this breakout session. So we are going to end our presentation with a bit of facilitated discussion followed by open dialogue. We really want to get to know everybody in the room and allow an opportunity to build community amongst each other. So with that, thank you for being here, and I'm going to get started. So The Infinite Game by Simon Sinek. Most of you might know Simon Sinek based on What's Your Why? But this book is highly applicable to higher ed, even though it's a business book. And I say that mainly because his message is to put people ahead of profits. And I think that the connection from there to being dedicated to being student-centered is pretty clear and applicable to anybody who reads it. So book recommendation, but I'm using it here for this quote particularly, which is: the concept of existential flexibility is the capacity to initiate an extreme disruption to a business model or strategic course in order to more effectively advance a just cause. I do hope that all of us in the room have student success as some component, if not the key component of what our cause is for the work that we do. But here I want to make clear that an existential flex is deliberate, not in response to something that forces a shift in our approach to our work. So I hope you all are as excited as I am to hear from Kevin Kruger of NASPA as our keynote speaker after this session. But I want to touch on something that I heard him say almost exactly a year ago in April of 2020, watching him on a webinar. He talked about how higher education really shifted rapidly to get laptops, hotspots, other resources to students who needed them as we transitioned to remote services. But he was very clear that while this was an admirable effort, it was definitely more of an exposure to how we weren't doing everything we could to promote equity until we absolutely had to, really in fear of watching enrollment implode if we didn't. So really just imagine if we were doing that all along, and if we take that approach into the next chapter of reintroducing students to our campuses. So not an exact quote, but I am confident that I interpreted what he said accurately. And The webinar is available on presence.io if you want to watch it for yourself. So the timeline that you see at the bottom, Yesica and Carlos are going to get into it more in depth. But just to kind of frame the conversation we're going to have, in March 2020, we had already started putting in space reservations for fall 2020. And I have to admit that when we had our conversation, when we found out about campus shifting to remote services, I really had the mindset of let's find a way to get through, the rest of March, April, and May, and we will regroup this summer and prepare to welcome students back in the fall. And we all know what happened next. Now we're still not exactly sure what fall 2021 is going to look like. And our 2020-2021 academic year has been 98% virtual, maybe 99% virtual, with the small exception of some drive-in movies making up the only in-person offerings that we've had this year. So just some, like I said, Yesica and Carlos will get into that background a little bit more, but just some framework for what we're talking about here today. So the data on the table here are rough estimates. I didn't connect with your IR departments, but I did a quick Google search of how many beds each of your campuses offers, and then what total enrollment is. So you look at it, UNR has by far the most residential students by a percentage, but is still serving a commuter population of around 80%, if not over 80%. So all of our campuses have a supermajority, if not 100% commuter population, which means that transportation is a barrier for many students. And even for those who have reliable personal transportation, time serves as a barrier to access services on campus. I was a commuter student myself with a reliable car. And I have to say that the commute from work to home, home to school, school to work, et cetera, those were some of my most anxiety-filled hours because it led me to having time to think about all the things that I had to do, but couldn't find the time to stay on top of. So imagine if we could provide our students with an opportunity to access campus services while cutting that commute out of the experience, which is, enter virtual services as one of many potential services that we can offer. So another book recommendation here, I believe Dr. Stephanie Coleman's on the call. Thank you for your support in being here. The Dean of Students, SALT team, Student Affairs Leadership team, is currently reading a book that will come together on retreat, but it's called Becoming a Student Ready College. And what I want to emphasize here is that we cannot simply be in search of the college ready student and feel like we're doing what we need to. We really need to adapt and make our institution student ready. And again, student virtual services moving forward is one potential solution there. So data taken here is from fall 2019. My apologies for not having fall 2020 readily available, but when our residence halls get to max capacity, we're still looking at over 90% commuter students. Almost 40% of our students are the non-traditional age 24 or older, and only 37% are full-time. On top of being commuter, you can see that 86% of our students travel more than 5 miles to campus, many of which are taking extremely lengthy bus trips. So prior to the pandemic hitting, we had a big win in that the bus schedule shifted from once per hour to 3 times per hour, but before that was the case, it was really hard to convince a student to participate in something on campus at risk that they might miss their bus and have to hang around for at least another hour to start their long trip home. To provide some comparison here about why these numbers start to matter, I received my Master of Public Administration from the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, and served as a graduate assistant in housing and residence life during my time there. It wasn't the case while I was there, but UNCW currently has a 2-year residency requirement. So 87% of freshmen live on campus their first year at UNCW, 84% are full-time students, and 73% of students are the quote unquote traditional college age of 24 and under. And I can say anecdotally on our campus, I anticipate that this might be true for you all at your campuses as well. Some of our most engaged juniors and seniors at Nevada State College were typically highly engaged freshmen. So imagine if we could capture 87% of freshmen on a regular basis through programs with their RA, larger campus departmental programs that could cater to their easy, really capitalize on how they can just walk right over from the residence hall. But again, I want to reference the previous slide. It isn't acceptable for us to say that we wish conditions were different. We need to recognize what our student profile is at our individual institutions and work deliberately to serve those students. And common theme, virtual services, even when we don't have to do it, might be one way for us to serve that need. Excuse me. So to go back to my anxiety-filled car rides when commuting between work and home and school, when I was on campus for classes as an undergraduate, the advising department for my school only accepted walk-ins for the time period where I was on campus for class. So my choices were to make an extra trip to campus on a different day with an appointment, or go sign in after class and get a walk-in appointment. So 3 weeks in a row, I tried to get a walk-in appointment, only to have to leave before my name was called, so I wasn't late to work. So of course, I'm not here to tell other departments what to do, but I share an example here. I had the opportunity to talk with our director of academic advising, and Zoom advising sessions are actually getting worse satisfaction ratings than phone advising sessions this semester, which is kind of in contrast with phone advising sessions typically get worse satisfaction ratings than in-person advising sessions. But thankfully, they are going to continue offering Zoom advising sessions even once we come back to campus, or at least that's the plan as of when I had the opportunity to talk to him. So the other example here, I won't touch on too much, but when you think about research opportunities, learning communities, things that take a high level of time commitment, we can't change that time commitment, but maybe we can offer orientation or informational type sessions virtually for students who might not be sure, they don't necessarily have the time to come to campus, but they want to learn more about it. We might just excite those students in a way that leads them to realizing that they are capable of taking on this opportunity and being willing to shift their work schedule or shift their transportation schedule to be able to engage in them. And for us, student life, I really view it as one of those types of services that's hard to truly replicate virtually in terms of trying to build community, but we are committing to doing so wherever it makes sense and wherever we can, so that we can try to engage more unique students as we return to campus as opposed to returning to normal. With that, I will pass the mic over to Yesica.
Thank you, Phil. So like Phil mentioned, this last year has definitely been a learning process, and with like having to kind of figure out and navigate how do we transition from being so solely used to being in person to create these relationships to give the students what they need to feel like more attached or more connected to the institution. We learned a lot. I can say like for my own, I've learned so much, and I say this as a joke, but it's serious. Like I didn't apply for an online institution because I didn't want to do virtual events, but now that we're in this like situation, I feel like we developed the skills that we weren't going to regularly seek. We weren't going to go look for workshops to how to do a virtual program, how to engage our students virtually. We kind of just had to adapt and make it our own. So one of the main skills that during this last year, I feel like I've honed, and even like our office has honed the setup of these virtual programs to definitely get our students to come out here. When we were in person, it was kind of like, hey, you're in the cafeteria, we're having something in the ballroom, why don't you come over? Now that it's all in a virtual setting, we had to definitely develop these different skills that I wasn't gonna usually look for. So the setup has definitely become like its own thing. Music, visual aids, being welcoming, getting creative, and trying to figure out how can we make this experience something that students are gonna like basically sign up and gravitate to without us having to pull them in physically. The run of the show, there's always like this setup, as well as like how early I need to be logged in, what time we need to start, when the students are going to come in, and what I need to be doing the whole time to give students this experience that will keep them there versus them just logging off or turning off their screen. And then capturing our audience. I know in the past, anything that's flashy, music in person, it just drives students, but capturing our audience has definitely been a little bit different. And it's taken a lot of actually talking to our students. What do they want to see? What do they want us to do on campus, and what kind of programs or educational experiences do they want to actually have on campus? So that's been a lot of surveying, and I think we've actually learned to do it more. Before, like our students were very helpful in telling us what they wanted to see. Now it's actually seeking that information for us to find what our audience wants on campus and being more flexible with their schedule. I think I'm one of those persons that tried to make our events or our programs within our schedule, our time frame, which is 8 to 5, Monday through Friday. But I've learned that during this virtual setting, 8 to 5 is not the best. as we did every event, we realized the later and later in the afternoon is what worked best for them, 5 p.m., 6 p.m., 7 p.m. And it's honestly where we would get the students that wanted to participate, but who wouldn't participate in a normal setting, just because of their time commitments. I think being more flexible to their schedule has definitely showed us that, like, okay, this is what we need to do for our students. And then the quality over quantity is one of the things that I've realized, like, we can offer as many events, as many programs for our students, but if we're not doing, like, if we're not basically honing it down to what they want, making it per their schedule, and just having this setup that's going to actually drive them to our programming, we won't get the students that we need. And just being more comfortable with virtual programming. Like I said, I did not sign up for this. I don't think any of us signed up for this, but it's just being comfortable enough that, like, I know I can get awkward behind the screen, but knowing that our students are also coming in a little bit cautious, but making them feel welcomed and knowing that this is a safe space and it's going to be a great space. I've gotten so much different feedback from students who I would have not met in a in-person setting. And one of my main roles is, like, I recruit students all the time to be student leaders within our organization, or just getting them involved on campus. And I've met so many different students in these, like, virtual settings that wouldn't have come in an in-person setting. So it's definitely being comfortable in offering all these different things, and just getting the quality of, like, these virtual programming and offering these different programs and these different options, whether it's in person, but now into a virtual setting, would definitely get them more engaged. And then if you can go to the next slide, Phil. So during the last 2 semesters, we did a full calendar of different events. Like in the fall, we had this beautiful calendar with like 2 to 3, even 4 events a week to try to get the students out there. But that's what we didn't understand, why they weren't showing up or what we were doing wrong. And it wasn't after till we realized, okay, the setup, what do students want? Like, actually honing down these skills to make them more engaging and getting our students to actually show up. These are just a couple honorable mentions that I have on the screen, but during the spring semester, we definitely picked up our game, and we actually had more engagement than the last semester, just by kind of trial and error and figuring out what was working best for students. And even just talking to them to see, like, what exactly they wanted to see gave us more of an insight of, like, what we could keep doing for them. And then I'll hand it over to Carlos.
Thank you, Yesica. So I don't know if this maybe happened with you all, but maybe you already had a plan pre-COVID about some type of online engagement, maybe something that you're like, oh, this might be great for our commuter students. And then, pandemic hit, and if, like, you just speed track through it. Well, if you did have that experience, definitely let us know in the comment. But that's exactly what happened with us. Prior to the pandemic, we're starting to talk about podcasting, because that's got really big over the last couple of years. And we're like, how can we integrate this into our student affairs community and kind of our student connect with our students in some capacity with that. And even esports, definitely let me know if any of you have esports experience here. But esports got massive, especially during the pandemic, as people stayed home and started kind of developing online communities through gaming. But for us, it was, the pandemic happened, we knew we had to have online engagement. And so we were like, all right, like, let's sort of speed track through this, like make sort of small steps to become this and move forward. We're very fortunate actually we applied for the NASPA Innovation Grant. They were specifically looking for innovative programs in higher education. And we were very fortunate enough to receive the grant that, again, kind of kicked us in the butt and moved us forward, because that was something that we were like in the planning stages, and then we moved forward with it. If you're interested in checking it out, it's called Nevada State Podcast Series. And what we've done there is we've interviewed different departments on our campus, so such as academic advising, career services, and now this semester we're actually sort of humanizing faculty by interviewing different faculty members at our institution. And the reason we did this was because part of the experience with students, the students are unaware of what services exist on our campus. And this just basically was a really interesting way for students to connect with this environment, right? Like, students can now, from their commute to maybe if they're going to the gym, going for a run, or going for a walk, that they could listen to a podcast and hear the director of, again, Academic Success Center and hear them about what services that exist. And instead of them having to ask peers about what services exist there, or maybe go to a website that may not have enough information, that they can simply just listen to an audio clip that's free access for students. And so something that we did, and we were really excited to do this, and it has been a journey for us. And as Yesica mentioned, we've learned a lot, and I somehow became a podcaster. So that part of wasn't part of the requirement for this job, but it's worked out beautifully with students really, again, meeting them at where they're at, right? We don't expect them to be there during a live time. Now they can watch it at any point throughout the year and into the future. And so esports was really unique as well. As I mentioned, esports grew rapidly over the pandemic, and that was a really unique way for different departments to build community as well. Not only did we sort of host esports tournaments across the board, different game nights, but even I've heard of other departments, such like for example, in our institution, the library services, they did like an Among Us night, and they were able to play that game, and that was able to build camaraderie and community within their department. And same thing with us. That's what we wanted. We knew that the students, it's very difficult for students to build communities on their own, right? If they don't know who to contact. And so for us to build a platform for that, and then for them to thrive in that community, was really essential during this time. And so the way we've done it is we have a Discord channel. We have a really small number, but it's about 50 students that are in this community. And also in that community is also faculty and staff. And so it's a really fun kind of like online space for that. And so students were still able to, again, kind of feel like they're part of in our case, Nevada State College community through something they're passionate about, which is online gaming. Another thing that we did was we started recording our workshops and events. I'm sure many of you do this as well. But one of the things that we've done was our Leadership Academy. So in our clubs and organizations were able to learn about different skill sets. So for example, they were targeted towards clubs and organizations, and it was a constitutional workshop, how to facilitate, how to facilitate conflict. And even our clubs and orgs meetings were present there, because as you all know, finding a live time for this is really, really difficult. Even when we had a doodle poll, it was so difficult to find the perfect and right time, right? We know that doesn't exist, but having those recordings was so efficient for clubs to go back and be able to be up to date with any new policy changes or updates that exist. One of the other things we did too was fitness tips. We did weekly, we had one of our student workers pick like a sort of a workout of the week. And then that was a way for us to inform students of proper form and just give some students some ideas of what they can do from home. And then the outdoor adventure series is something that we're really, something that was one of our signature events. And we hosted about different outdoor adventure events every semester, roughly about 3 or 4. And instead we just ended up doing a GoPro series. And so we would ask one of our student workers or myself, and we would go out to a hike and then just take the GoPro and give students an experience and some information. And so again, this is an opportunity for students to go back and look at what we're doing, what's going on campus, and give them some information at their pace, as we know that this is probably the most effective way, right, to work with students. Although I'm going to say I love live events. I think you get more value out of it. But at the same time, we also recognize that the pandemic has certainly challenged some students in unique ways. So next slide. Perfect. So this leads perfectly to the challenges, right? And I think a lot of us can relate to this. One of the challenges that we had about moving forward with sort of this online model is, of course, we have to be mindful of Zoom fatigue, right? We've probably heard a lot of people talk about this, and I can say from my conversations with different students is that pretty much by the time it was August, September, they were pretty burned down at that point. they were pretty much over it. It was so hard to engage with students that were looking at a screen for 5-6 hours to continue to look at a screen and try to attend an event, right? That became really relevant for our students, and it became, you could no longer sort of encourage them to go, like in the past, right? We would have food as an incentive, and now we don't even have that option, right? It was kind of like they have to have some connection to us or some really strong passion for them to attend an event. And so we became very mindful of that through this last year, is that promotion, of course, has changed because everyone is promoting stuff. Everything went to social media. Everything went to different formats, right? I mean, I can't imagine being a student, right? Like you get 20 different updates on a bunch of upcoming events. And in the past, you probably only saw a few, right? Whatever you saw on flyers on campus or whatever form of marketing existed out there. So that became increasingly difficult. Was how do we outshine other promotions? Like how does ours, shine more, right? And that became challenging, right? It's for our students. I think sometimes they would even probably put their phones away and say, like, you know what, this is too much information. I just want to chill at home, kind of sit back. Finding the perfect time, as I mentioned, even with our clubs and orgs meetings, what we do, maybe it's unique to our institutions, we invite all clubs to go to one general meeting once a month. And this is a space for them to give updates and for us to provide updates ourselves. And finding the perfect time to have those meetings became increasingly difficult. And as we all know, there's no perfect time. And part of that, I think, in getting buy-in, it kind of connects with promotion here, but we saw a decrease in involvement, and I don't blame students for this, right? Like I think that a lot of things have changed, and we've known students that had to take care of their grandmother, had to take care of their siblings, and they just don't have that time that they used to before, right? That they had that ability to escape their home for a while and be able to attend events, but now they have to stay at home and now take care of some home responsibility that they didn't have to normally, right? And so we became very hyper aware of this as well, is that the decrease isn't so much on them and their efforts or their wants or needs for this. It was, they had to take care of stuff at home, or even search for different jobs, or, take mental health breaks and get away from the rigors of this online world that we live in. And so I think that this, this kind of will lead to our next slide here about, us being mindful of this, but able to adapt, right? Like, how do we adapt to do we change the methods of promotion? How do we recognize this? How do we develop better relationships for students to be more connected to these events, and not have to be incentivized by the food, but incentivized by the people they're with, right? The community that they're around. And so we kind of have to, view these as challenges, but also as opportunities of like, okay, how can we overcome these?
Thank you, Yesica and Carlos. In terms of building the skills, why put them away, right? There's an increased tool chest of services that we can provide to serve students. One thing that Yesica and Carlos didn't necessarily mention directly, but we've talked about, in the early days of COVID-19 moving us to remote working, we would play music and hope that people could hear it through our external speakers, versus there's an actual way to implement that on Zoom that they've both learned, right? So we can create this virtual experience that is much more high quality than prior to building the skills that they've spent over, like I said, the last 15 months, so over a year or two to build. So, and I think that's true for everybody in the room. We are, in all likelihood, because of our commitment to serving students, we have all developed more skills to provide virtual services moving forward. So why wouldn't we put that to use in order to better serve our students, particularly our non-traditional commuter students who we might not have been reaching prior to the pandemic. So, and the reality is that virtual services always mattered. So it just took a global pandemic to force us to offer them en masse. Student engagement and use of campus resources really shouldn't be limited to only those who can afford to commute to campus. And I say afford, meaning, to spend time and resources doing so. Aston's IEO theory seems elementary, and to be honest, I think it's older than I am, but it still has relevance in some capacity all these years later for a reason. For those of you who might not be familiar, IEO is that, in very short, IEO is that inputs plus environment equals outcomes. So in other words, we can look at the quality of student, and I say quality from a purely academically prepared perspective, as making up the inputs, the services that we offer, and our approach to creating a holistic student experience for students make up the environment, and the outcomes are the typical student success metrics, right? Retention, progression, graduation rates. So again, to reference becoming a student-ready college, only about 25% of part-time students ever graduate. I don't know if you remember or not, but 37% of Nevada State College students are full-time. So the vast majority of our students make up that part-time population in some capacity. So the 25% isn't a 4-year graduation rate, that's the total graduation rate ever. We can look at that figure and kind of let ourselves off the hook. You know, we've been intentional about trying to graduate students, but part-time students don't graduate across the board. Or we can look at that number and know that we're failing a lot of students, and we need to do the work necessary to try to improve the outcomes for the students that we're serving. And virtual services, again, is just one way to do so. And I hope we can all commit to keeping them as part of our programmatic efforts moving forward. So with that, you know, we mentioned at the beginning, we wanted to information share our experience, but we also wanted to create some good dialogue amongst the group and build relationships across campus. So the three of us are going to share a concept that we're committed to doing moving forward, and then we are going to ask if you're willing to unmute yourself and share, if you want to drop something in the chat to share a concept that you are committed to moving forward at your campus. And then after we kind of go through the group share, just general open dialogue until our time together is up. So I'll start us off. You know, I've had the fortune of serving on some planning committees. You know, Yesica served on a planning committee for Nevada Voter Summit. Carlos and I have served on the planning committee for this conference. Things that opportunities that we may not have had otherwise without, you know, kind of being forced into this virtual services format. But prior to that, I had the fortune of serving on a planning committee for a national student government institute through the National Association for Campus Activities. And I had a colleague there that I often joked about. Well, we both joked together about how when our students hear each other say the same thing, it resonates with them so much differently because it's an outsider coming in and sharing that information, right? So we've toyed with the idea of, you know, trading, going back and forth each other's campuses to help with student government retreats, that sort of thing. But it's never happened, right? Like we're not gonna spend budget dollars to have each other come to our campuses and present on something that we're able to present on. But this virtual services really allows us to leverage that national network, that statewide network that we're building here today. I believe that I'm sharing my screen, so I can't see the participant list too clearly, but I believe that I saw Keith Bingham on the call. I had the pleasure to meet him at one of these NACA Student Government Institute conferences I'm talking about. And he shared that he's a Myers-Briggs, you know, he's certified in Myers-Briggs, right? So if I'm looking to do a Myers-Briggs through building those relationships, I might not bring him down to campus from the north, but maybe there's something that I can provide in return, and we can maximize our resources to really leverage those networks that we've been able to build in this virtual format and provide services virtually moving forward. So maybe it's an in-person retreat. I know our student government is desperate for their next retreat to be in person, and hopefully that will be the case, but that doesn't mean that we can't, you know, put up on the screen a virtual presenter coming in, and we've just saved all the travel fees and potentially speaker fees. We could still potentially pay those though. So that's what I'm committed to moving forward is really leveraging people that I know are experts in certain key content areas and trying to expose them to our students.
Yeah, and I think for office too, and moving forward with, like I mentioned before, for the podcast was a great way for us to connect. But, you know, think about what if a podcast would be adaptable to your institution, and if it is, like what that would look like. As I mentioned, for us, it was really about informing and connecting students to some fun content. We actually have a collaboration with another club. Their name's Sting Studio, and they kind of do this like fun conversations. And again, this was just a really fun way to adapt to what's popular today. So find kind of, I would encourage you all to kind of find something like this, or even, I mean, I know students would love an opportunity. For us, even our student workers want to seek this opportunity of starting a podcast. So you'll utilize what's trending, I think, in finding ways to connect with students through that. I think social media is, of course, is now, as even though ironically, I kind of said that it's like used like a lot right now. But I think once after things start to open up more and our institutions start to kind of go a little bit more back to normal, that you'll find that the social media can still be a strong platform, right? And so, for example, something we're planning to implement moving forward is recording and doing the GoPro recording still at our upcoming in-person outdoor adventures. And so still be able to do that. And so for students who may not have the ability or access to attend any of our outdoor adventure events, that we can still record them and give them a similar experience from home. Obviously, it's never going to be the same, but it's going to be something that's better than nothing, because in the past, we never recorded any of those stuff. We kind of just say like, here's our flyer, come out. And then afterwards we, don't really post them. We may post a couple pictures, but to do the video is maybe still gives that student an opportunity to have a similar experience from the comfort of their home. Also, this is like a big one here. I think I often hear through colleagues that, they want to give up on virtual services because their data says that it's bad, right? But I want to encourage you to maybe take a different approach. I think moving into next semester, or maybe in the following semester, as again, things start to go back to normal, is reevaluate your data. I think, as I mentioned, Zoom fatigue is real, right? We know students don't want to go to another meeting online, go to another screen online, but in a year from now, that might be different, right? It might become not as frequent. So don't count too much on your current data. Like, I know that it's maybe helps kind of maybe enhance your current services, but I think that the reactions will be much different in the future. And so, having a little bit of optimism in future data might be beneficial to kind of better understand the needs for students at that point versus now. Where they're kind of, like I said, just overwhelmed with a lot of the online stuff.
And one of the things that, like, for sure for me moving forward in our office is like virtual orientations and professional development workshops for our student leaders. So we know we can do, fun events and live events virtually and still have students be engaged. But one of the things that we had to do this last year is all the retreats, all the orientations for our student leaders, we had to do it virtually to try to figure out how, basically still give them the same experience, but in a virtual setting. And it worked very well. We were able to, through Zoom, there's breakout sessions, there's different activities that you can do. A couple of things, like we did a couple activities where we separate the students, they go into individual rooms. We covered like communication styles and like different things that we typically would have done in person, but they worked very well virtually as well. And for example, here, our student government, our NSSA, when it's a full cohort, it's 23 students. So trying to get 23 students to drive to Nevada State College when they live all across the valley has its challenge on its own. So being able to have them just meet virtually for a couple hours to get to know each other, covering the basics and covering the necessities for their term or throughout the semester worked very well. And it allowed for more students to actually participate and show up without having like to find transportation or figuring out how they're going to get to campus and be here for a whole day. So committing to doing virtual orientations and professional development workshops and giving them a blend of like still coming in person, hopefully for the future in the fall, but then still having an online option, I think it's going to work very well because it gives students like an opportunity to attend, but not worry of how they're going to get to campus. Nevada State, even for me, is pretty far. So I can only imagine for our students who live on the other side of town of trying to figure out how to get here, but still participate in these kind of orientations and professional development. And that's just not just for NSSA, like any students on campus or any retreats or workshops. I think offering a virtual option will work well. And I think it opens it up for more students to participate.
Great. Thank you both for sharing and for the continued commitment to and for our students. So with that, like we opened up with, we really want this to be about getting to know each other. We've shared our story, our experience, our plan for moving forward. If there's anybody that is willing to unmute, or I'm not sure if there's anything in the chat, but something that you are willing to commit to, or you're thinking about committing to for students, we'd like to kind of go into that to have some facilitated conversation, and then really just open dialogue with any time that we have left. I see, or at least I saw before I started sharing, I think there's some people from Nevada State on that I know are doing great work virtually. So if you're willing to lead us off, or really anybody who's willing to unmute and share, or again, I can't see the chat. So.
I'll go ahead and start us. Sorry, it's Marnie. This is really this presentation was helpful for me because I basically work in the equivalent office to you all at UNLV. And in my role, I support our 400 student organizations on campus. And the question I've gotten a lot of people are saying, you know, are always like, oh, student orgs, I'm sure, are struggling. Like, how hard has it been? And I always like to say, like, yes. And also, we've had some really cool success stories. We've had some orgs that have actually really flourished in this environment. You know, for example, our Alliance for Non-Traditional Students, amazing. They have grown hugely this semester because they realize this has filled a gap for a lot of them. Our Girls Who Code are doing really well. Our First Generation Club is doing really well. So I'm kind of just wondering if you all maybe have any anecdotes or success stories from your student orgs or other groups on campus where you are maybe were surprised that they actually flourished or did really well in this environment.
Yeah, we had a couple for sure. Yeah, it's kind of a different, yeah, it's such a good question. Yeah, it's so difficult. Yeah, some clubs have struggled significantly and others have persevered. And I think it kind of goes with Phil's point up here with leveraging national network. I found that particularly like Sci-Chi, they were able to get a lot of guest speakers, like really fascinating guest speakers present in their monthly meetings. And normally they wouldn't have done something like that. It would have been, they had to get someone to, come in person, and it would be like once a semester they would have someone like this, a guest speaker. And so I think that I've seen that, like that adaptation where they just have really enhanced that virtual learning experience for their members, where they find value in that, right? It's like this building their network, building or expanding outside of Nevada State College and learning from their peers. And I think that's one. Phil, what do you think? I know you probably know a couple clubs as well.
Yeah, I mean, Carlos could definitely speak to specific clubs a little bit better than I could, just speak based on his role and work with them this year. But one thing that I've always known to be a historical issue is just scheduling, right? Like our campus is in the foothills, pretty much in Boulder City. We have a high percentage of students who live in North Las Vegas. You know, we talked about the student profile and how far the travel is for them. A student's just not going to, I mean, we have dedicated students that do, but a student's just not going to drive to campus for an hour student org meeting. So being able to offer these, right? And our IT department has always been phenomenal, but like knowing that, you know, if we can schedule student orgs in certain rooms, there's the ability for them to meet in person if they want that experience, but to also live stream, you know, and have a Zoom meeting, right? So like the blended model moving forward, I think we'd be really remiss to not offer at least some kind of, you know, even if it's a, you know, do you want to go through this optional training? And if so, we can set you up with these types of services. I think that to not do it would be a really grave mistake, because to your point, you know, it's just not, the in-person thing just doesn't work for a lot of students. We're from what I saw in my very brief research, like none of our campuses are some of the campuses that you might see in other systems where the majority of students are living on or right on top of campus, and it's easy to engage them in person. So I don't have a specific example, but I do know that for some students that have wanted to get involved in the past, like I feel a little bit guilty that we didn't offer this type of thing before we absolutely had to, right? And moving forward, I think that it's a great opportunity for us to continue doing so.
While we're waiting for some more questions come, I can always fill question time. How are you helping your students to start to plan for that transition back to whatever quote unquote normal is? I think, you know, personally, and I think this is going to be the case with students, transitioning into this virtual thing was really challenging. And it took a lot from all of us to kind of just figure out and then fall into a pattern and figure out, like, we maybe feel like we know what we're doing. And now we're all going to have to go back and actually kind of do it again in another way. And I think some of our students got used to this. And now, even though it's challenging, they're like, yeah, but this is the beast I know. And so now we're going to go back to like another like transition time. So I'm kind of wondering, you know, what are your plans to help your students navigate that transition, even if it doesn't look like the normal before, even if it's still some sort of hybrid? What are you all expecting that to look like?
That's a great question. So a couple things to lead in. I'm a rambler. That's why I was reading off my notes for the presentation. So feel free to rein me in if I'm rambling. But I think that there's a couple key things to recognize. Nevada State College in particular has always been fortunate, and we were opened in 2002, right? So like we never had to adhere to like these longstanding traditions. We were always able to allow for students to kind of create whatever they wanted their experience to be. And we started building traditions as we went into this. But I think it's important for all of us to not be overcommitted to going back to how things were. And I think that if we do that, then the student voice becomes at the center of how we're going to do things moving forward. And whether or not it shapes out to be exactly what we want, or is, as Yesica mentioned earlier, what's most convenient for us on that 8 to 5 type of schedule is up to chance, right? But if we allow for students to be part of creating that new normal and be part of those conversations, to really not just be at the table, but help make decisions, I think that we can overcome that a little bit. I was on a focus group for a NASPA like study, and a colleague shared that when you really think about it, the seniors from 2020 have graduated. The juniors from 2020 will graduate this year, right? And I know that we don't have we don't necessarily have the stereotypical profile of student success. Our students tend to take more than the 4 years to graduate. So this is a little bit loosely applicable, but you're looking at your juniors and seniors leaving before truly having an opportunity to share that institutional knowledge. And then you're looking at a freshman class that came in fall 2020 that never really got the opportunity to take on legitimate like student leadership roles, right? Like they might have been an involved student, but didn't really ever take that next step. A freshman class that came in the fall of 2021 that for us, at least here at Nevada State, like the majority of them maybe have never stepped foot on campus. Orientation was virtual, classes were all remote. And then welcoming the class of fall 2022 to campus, we've lost a lot of institutional knowledge. So I think that, to your point, and our busy planning season is about to start, this May, in terms of how we make that transition happen. So I don't have any tangible, like examples of what we plan to do, but we don't have to go back to how things were, and we can put students at the center of it, right? So we need to be mindful of giving them the skill set that they need, right? So like our students need to be willing and able to meet in person and have the same experiences in person, because they're not going to necessarily hit the job market and not need those types of skills, right? So we're not going to stay all virtual. Whether or not students want that, like we just can't do it. We need to provide them with learning outcomes that we can only deliver in person, but keeping their voice at the center of how we rebuild, right? And I think for those of you who have homecoming, right, we're not going to not have homecoming, but if there's another tradition on your campus that, why have we always done this? Have we always done this because we've always done this, or are the outcomes of this really great? And if it's not the second part of that, then maybe we would consider just building a new tradition or building a new plan forward with, again, the student voice at the center of it. I'm a rambler. I'm going to stop there. Sorry.
No, I think that's perfect. I like just ending on the idea that student voices need to stay centered in whatever our new planning structure is. And I think we're all going to have to just figure out, kind of take it one step at a time, solve one problem and the next, until we feel like we've, amassed some experience in whatever it is that we're doing. That's always been my kind of approach. I just wanted to say, take a minute to say thank you to Phil and Yesica and Carlos for such a great presentation. And I wanted to ask if you all would be willing to put your email addresses in the chat, should anyone be interested in following up with you individually about any questions they have, or realize later that they maybe could, gain some insight from you. That takes us right to the 11:20 mark. So we hope you all enjoyed this presentation. I think you've got a few minutes of break before our next thing. So thank you all very much. Have a great day. Happy Friday.
Thank you all.